Good morning. My name is Hannah Bond. I'm very nervous about being here. I have to say, I don't usually seek the spotlight. I don't like to be the center of attention. But I have really enjoyed this series, my story, my song, these last couple of years. And so it's a real honor to be able to share my story with you. Like a lot of you, my grandparents had a big influence on me, especially my grandmothers. And my father's mother, she was very quiet, but also very committed to her faith. And after my father died when I was 8, my mother worked. She was a nurse practitioner. And so in the summers, I would go and stay with my grandparents all summer. And I remember my grandmother, she kept a big garden in the back of her yard. And she was up at first light. She would go out and pick anything that was ready to pick. And she would immediately can it or whatever she did to it. And, before the heat of the day, she had put that up. In the basement, there were floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, and they were just packed with fruits and vegetables that she put up during the summer, and she fed the family all year from that. In addition to taking care of her family, she also shared a lot of her talents in service to others. She was part of a United Women in Faith group at her church, and they had a room with a quilting frame. And so they had a quilting bee every week, and they would finish quilts both to raise money and also to make some quilts to give away to the needy. And I remember when I was about 10, they fostered a family from Vietnam, and she took special care to make a quilt for one of the daughters for her bedroom. And she worked with the mother and daughters to show them how to plant a garden in Virginia and then how to preserve what they grew. And so I think, from my grandmother, I gained my love of gardening. And, I do have kind of a green thumb. I've got an intuitive sense of plants. And I think from her, I get my habit of getting up really early. My time is usually 4:30 every morning. Anyway, lots of good things, including her bread and pickle recipe. Bread and butter pickle, sorry. My mother's mother was very playful and creative. She never learned to drive, so she lived her life mostly at home. She wrote poetry, and she had just a very magical laugh. And she did have a hard life. She took care of her parents until they died in a really small town. They lived in the mountains of Tennessee. It was called Ceres, Virginia, very remote little town. And so she didn't marry until she was 30, which was really considered old then. Too close? Not close enough. Not close enough. Oh my goodness, really? Okay. So anyway, she didn't marry till she was 30, and she had 11 children. Only 7 of them lived to adulthood. And my grandfather, it was kind of a big drinker. He liked to go out with his buddies. He never really took her along for that. And I remember later, when I knew him, he became very sick with diabetes, but she took such good care of him. And so from her, I learned to have hope and how to persevere through troubled times. And I used to love to stay with her. In the hot summer afternoons, we would go out on the porch, and she'd say, "Let's go watch the cars go by." But there weren't many cars because it was a very rural area. But we'd go out there, and she would tell me stories, funny stories of when she was a child, and she would sing songs. And one of her favorite hymns was "Joyful, Joyful." And so that's become one of my favorites as well. And I especially love the second verse because it reminds us of the beauty of God's creation. So I was 12 when my mother remarried, my stepfather, Jim. We moved to Nashville, and we actually bought a home just over on Hickory Valley, really close here. We started coming to Belmead United Methodist. So in high school, I attended this church. I was part of the youth group, and we had enough youth then that we had a big youth choir, and I sang as part of that. So, I was part of a church-going family, and as a teenager, I really thought that I believed in God, but I hadn't really heard the gospel in a way that I had a personal relationship with God. And so, but he was working on me. So I went to college at MIT, and the first week that I was there, I met my friend Siobhan, who has come here. She's visited Fidelis here with me. And immediately she asked me to be her prayer partner, which was something I had never even heard of before. And she dragged me with her, well, I shouldn't say drag, but she took me with her to InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And it was there that, I experienced my first real Bible study. And she is so intentional about everything she does. She caused me to think about, what does it really mean to be a good friend, and how do I want to be a good friend? So anyway, it was while I was at MIT that I finally invited God to come into my heart and to be my Savior. So after I graduated, I had a degree in mechanical engineering. My first job was in a research and development group at Corning Glass, which is in Corning, New York. And I was there a couple of years, and then I moved on to GE Aerospace in Princeton, New Jersey. Now, that is now part of Lockheed Martin. So I stayed there for many years as a spacecraft systems engineer, and enjoyed my work very much. For the first 16 years that I was working, I was always the only woman in my groups. There just weren't a lot of female engineers. And so I didn't see a lot of role models who looked like me, and so I had some insecurity. I felt like I needed to work really hard to prove myself. And so I was always super prepared and very conscientious. And I did have a lot of professional success. I had a lot of promotions, and I got more and more responsibility. And I enjoyed my work, but I also felt like that my life was too one-sided. And I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate to the struggle to find the right balance between work and personal, right? And so even though I was having some success, I felt like I was sacrificing maybe too much in terms of not having enough friendships and relationships, missing out on family events, maybe even some sacrifices regarding health. And so around 2007, I decided to make a big change. And so at that time, I was working as a business management consultant for Accenture. And so I could live anywhere as long as there was a good airport nearby. So I came back to Nashville to be closer to my mother and my stepfather. They were divorced by this time, but that brought me closer to family. But I knew that wasn't going to be enough, because I left on the first flight Monday morning. I didn't get home until really late Thursday night, sometimes not until Friday night. And that just didn't give me enough time to build a network of friends here in Nashville. So I joined the Teach for America Corps in Nashville. They had just created it the year before, and I taught math and engineering at Stratford High School for a couple of years. And then after that couple of years, I went on to Harpeth Hall, where I taught physics for several years. And actually, Harpeth Hall was the school I graduated from. And so it was great to be part of that community again. And I have just retired at the end of this school year. So anyway, but that transition to teaching, that career change brought so many blessings to me. For one thing, I started developing a lot more patience and empathy. And I loosened up and started having some more fun. I've always loved to laugh. I mean, who doesn't? But I don't really have a great sense of humor, I guess. But I discovered the power of squirrels because, squirrels are basically, they are just ridiculous, aren't they? But they're cute and they're funny, and they really helped me make my students laugh, and just as a way to, lighten things up. I also, by teaching, I was back in Nashville full time. And a couple of years after I started teaching, my stepfather, his Parkinson's disease progressed to the point that he really needed a lot of help. And gosh, I was here. I mean, that was wonderful to be here to help him. And I had never been a caregiver, so I didn't really know how to help. But his long-term partner, Carol, was a pediatric cardiac charge nurse at Vanderbilt, and she knew. And so she was just a wonderful example and taught me, how to look for things that people need even when they can't really advocate for themselves, and how to do small things that helped him be more comfortable. And so I was his conservator for 4 years until he passed away in 2015. And then a couple of years after Jim passed away, my mother, her dementia started becoming significantly worse. And so another blessing is that I was here, to help her as well. And so I had my house in Bellevue, but I moved in with her here for a couple of years, and then I moved her into my house. And anyway, and was with her until she passed away this past January. And it was actually my mother who caused me to come back to Belmead United Methodist. I had been attending Harpeth Heights Baptist Church in Bellevue. It was just closer to where I lived. But she wanted to start coming back to church, and she wouldn't have done it without me. And so I started bringing her here. First, I joined the Shepherd's class, and then Fidelis. And she came with me to Fidelis a lot. She loved that class. And we tried to take the Belmead 101 in 2020, but after the second class, COVID hit, right? We did join the church at the end of that year in the last outdoor service. So she did a good thing bringing me here. I have just been overwhelmed with the sense of community and how wonderful, our Belmead church family is. And I have learned so much from the examples of others. When I think of Lynn Kaufman and Lou Wilkins and how they are so careful to greet every new person who comes and visits, and they really encourage people to become involved. Susan Fields, who was so caring and kind and faithful, visiting my mother when she was in Barton House for about 14 months at the end of her life. And then in my grief, after my mother died, was so attentive to me. People like Kenny Cosner, such enthusiasm, and he uses his gifts to teach. I mean, these are just a few, but so many people here have touched my life and have shown me good examples of what I can do also to contribute to our community. The last few years, teaching and caregiving, both of these experiences have led me just to the conviction that my purpose, what I really need to be doing, is paying attention to the people close to me and doing my best to take care of them and love them. And there is a Bible verse, or just a Bible passage, that really speaks to me, which is in Jeremiah 17. And I know it was already read, but I'm going to read it again. So this is Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. I know that the heat and the drought are going to come. I mean, we all have struggles and things that we have to deal with in our lives. But I want to be like that tree that Jeremiah describes, because, I want to trust God to see me through those times and keep working to bear good fruit. So that's one reason that I chose the second hymn that we're going to sing, which is Be Still My Soul. I think that song also reflects the idea of continuing to have confidence in God, knowing that He will be faithful to us and will help us pass through periods of trouble. And so now, please, if you're able, stand and sing with us hymn 534, Be Still My Soul. Thank you.